Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium. I'm a day late. It's Friday, September 26, 2014. We're still in the year beyond Thunderdome. And I apologize to all of you who've been waiting for the news and views. Normally, I do them on Thursdays, as you know, but I had a lot of things kind of come crashing in at uh, the late part of this week, beginning yesterday. And I had some company today and had a nice long discussion with that company, in part about what I want to be talking about today. But again, thank you for waiting, and here we go. There's an interesting article, there's an interesting news story that's been circulating, and it really kind of piqued my interest, and I hope it does yours as well. This is the story about certain aspects of the Rockefeller family network of foundations that has indicated that they are going to begin divesting petroleum stocks from their portfolio. And I'm actually going to be reading from the RT version of this story because I think their analysis is on to something, at least in part, not all the way. But I'll share what I think may be going on after I get through this article, because this is a rather significant step for the Rockefeller family foundations to begin to undertake. And there's an aspect of this story that RT, for some reason, is missing, and that also raises some questions in my opinion. But anyway, the story's title is Rockefeller Oil Dynasty to Divest from Fossil Fuels. And the story is pretty much laid out at the very beginning of the article. It says, quote, "In a symbol of the times, America's biggest oil family, the Rockefellers, has announced it will get rid of any investments or holdings in fossil fuels from its its $860 million charitable fund and in target clean energy instead." Now stop and think just about that. The network of the various Rockefeller foundations and funds has a total wealth of almost $1 billion. Now, we're not talking about the personal family fortune, we're just talking about that network of foundations and funds. RT goes on to say, and this I think is really the teeth of the article and the teeth of what the Rockefeller networked foundations are doing. Quote, "The announcement is part of a $50 billion pledge by over 180 institutions to cut oil, natural gas, and coal from their portfolios and redirect investment into clean energy." Quote again, "Our immediate focus will be on coal and tar sands, two of the most intensive sources of carbon emissions," unquote, the statement said, adding that investment in the two sectors will be redirected to less than 1% of the total portfolio by the end of 2014, unquote. That's the end of this year. And the article then concludes, interestingly enough, on the RT website, under a little subject header that says, "A nice gesture." And this is where I think their analysis is at least partly correct. It states, quote, "The switch won't be immediate or apply to the full $860 million in the charitable funds. The divestment will only apply to 10% of the endowment, an approved commitment from the fund's board of trustees in line with the organization's sustainable development goals." Quote, "There may continue to be minimal investments in our portfolio in those energy sectors," unquote, the statement said, clarifying that it will be a two-step process. The divestment program will be conducted with the overall organization's finances in mind. That is, they won't divest if such a move negatively will alter the charity's day-to-day operations, unquote. And that's the end of the RT article. Now, clearly, RT suspects and indicates with that little subject header a nice gesture. that what the Rockefeller funds are doing is creating a political posture, but they don't say why. And I suspect part of the reason why is indicated in the article by the fact that they mention that the Rockefeller family's involvement in petroleum is becoming unpopular, particularly in certain progressive circles, students and so on, academia and what have you. So if you bear that in mind, then at the first level of analysis, what it looks like to me, and probably to RT, is that what the Rockefeller Foundation funds and so on, this vast network of charitable organizations, over 180, as that article indicated, is attempting to bring people back into agreement or bring them to a point of less cynicism about the financial and power elite of the West. Okay? And insofar as it goes, I think that analysis may be correct. But I do think there's a deeper story here, and this is my high-octane speculation of the day. A few years ago, and I can't remember exactly what the year was, it was reported, I believe by Daniel Estulin, the gentleman that follows the Bilderberg meetings very, very carefully, that one of the topics that was being discussed at the meeting was the issue of fusion, in other words, fusion energy. Now, if I recall correctly, that's all that was said about that particular topic when it was being discussed at these Bilderberg meetings within the last few years. So in other words, the topic wasn't about cold fusion versus the big hot fusion, magnetic containment, billion-dollar projects. It was just fusion, okay? And fusion would be, obviously, a clean energy. It would be a sustainable energy, to use that favorite buzzword of the globalists. It would be something, in other words, that the Rockefeller family foundations, as well as the Rockefeller family's own personal private investments, would take an interest in. So I think this is the deeper level here. I think we're seeing, perhaps, the first signal that the financial elite of the West is realizing that these technologies are beginning to become feasible. In other words, that's a clear signal that there may be something going on in the world of fusion that they haven't told us, that makes them think that this is promising enough that now's the time to begin the movement of all of the capital investment from traditional types of petroleum and the more recent types of petroleum development, shale oil and so on, out and move it into alternative energy, particularly fusion. Now, the reason I'm emphasizing that point is we have seen, and we have all been watching the news, where new technologies, 3D printing, so on and so forth, NASA comes out with stories about testing certain avant-garde and exotic methods of propulsion and deciding that there may be something to them. We've been watching the story of Andrea Rossi and his cold fusion project in Italy. So in other words, they're coming out now with technologies. They're beginning to be talked about and debated in the major media as an acceptable form of technology and energy. And this, I think, is a huge long-term clue that the Western power elite is going to change the game. And in this context, I want you to remember that they're building a big experimental fusion reactor costing billions of dollars right now at this very moment in France. So one has to wonder if behind this divestiture there is something afoot that they know about already in terms of development of alternative energy technologies. I suspect that this is the first of a long series of things that we're going to see. Now, if I'm correct, then you're going to start seeing other foundations like Carnegie, DuPont, Ford, and so on, all these big foundations begin similar processes of divesting of certain types of energy and moving those funds into capital investment in so-called green or sustainable energies. And I suspect the Rockefellers, again, are pointing the way. So this is a huge story. This kind of fell off the mainstream media radar, but I think this is a very, very huge story, and RT is right to point it out. I don't think their analysis goes far enough. I think that this move is a much deeper move than just politics and trying to make themselves look acceptable to the progressive environmental community. I think this is something much bigger and much more long term. They know something. Otherwise, they wouldn't be committing this kind of capital, $50 billion over the next few decades, to this move. All right, that's a huge chunk of money. And it represents, I think, the fact that the world is being driven now in a transformation involving the driving of new technologies by the financial elites. This is one to watch. This one fell off the radar screen, but this is definitely one to watch, folks, because I think we're going to see a lot more of it, and probably in the next few years. So watch those foundations, DuPont, Ford, Carnegie, watch all of these things, and the key is look behind the environmentalist rhetoric to see what they're really doing, where they're really moving all of this capital. My bet is they're moving it into fusion, probably eventually, maybe solar, but for right now, my bet is fusion. And that story, if you see Rockefeller and fusion coupled in the news, then that's a bingo. All right, thank you, folks, for putting up with my delay this week in the news and views from the Nefarium. I'll see everybody on the flip side, and God bless.